clouds are not lit up, but guess what? My clouds, I'm missing the remote and it won't work any other way. And the viewfinder on my camera, it's finally died. I can't even get it to, sometimes if I would twist it, I could get the picture to show up at weird angles, but it won't even do that. So I'm looking for a secondhand camera on eBay. Okay, because I don't have $400 to spend on a camera like every year or every other year, right? Okay, now let's find, oh my goodness, gotta shut all this stuff down. Okay, live, because I can't see the chat at the moment. I can't see the chat at the moment. There we go. All righty, let's pop out the chat. Hey, Stacy, Jennifer, Lily, how's it going? All right. So we are on live chat, and where's my book now? Things have been going missing. I never, my remote, except to go when we went to the races, my remote for my lights has never gone farther than right here. And it's driving me nuts that it's should be either right in this drawer or right here beside my thing. And it's just gone. It's just up and walked away. Oh, no, it hasn't. Look at that. It was hid. I've looked in that drawer 5 times. The skinny little drawer. There we go. Hey, 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 Natasha B. There is a new book coming out about Mr. Edwards. The preface says he is real or an idea of a mountain man in the time. It's in reorder. Yeah, the thing is I can only read what is in the public domain, right? So let me just make sure you guys are okay. Now, my book. Where's my book? Oh, come on. Find the remote, lose the book. Honest to goodness, folks. I am not, where is my book? I put it in the drawer. Okay. How's everybody doing? Is this day 11? Let me just check something here. Let's go here. Oh, that was day 11. Okay, this is day 12 then. All right, I'm going to edit that. Give me a second, folks. This is day 12. We had day 11 on, what's today? Tuesday? We had it on Monday or Sunday. Or I don't know what day it was, but it's day 12. Okay, now let's go back over here. And why is oh, okay. That was weird. Okay, save. Little House Live by the okay. All right, we're all ready. Leanne, Stacy, Judith, Rhonda, Natasha, Kimberly, Barefoot Chickens, Alex, Lily, Jennifer, and Stacy. Hi, hi, hi. We are on chapter 29. So we got 29 and 30, 31 and 32, but I don't know. We may get through them all. Hey, Linda Bopp. How are you, darling? All right. Chapter 29, The Shanty on the Claim. The first thing to do is dig a well, said Pa next morning. He shouldered his spade and shovel and went whistling toward the slough while Laura cleared the breakfast table and Ma rolled up her sleeves. Now, girls, she said cheerfully, all together with a will, we'll soon have things to rights. But even Ma was puzzled that morning. The little claim shanty was full as it would hold, Everything must be carefully fitted into the space. Laura and Carrie and Ma lifted and tugged the furniture this way and that and stood and thought and tried again. Mary's rocking chair and the table were still outdoors when Pa came back. "Well, Caroline, your well's all dug," he sang out. "6 feet deep in good cold water in quicksand. Now I'll hammer together a cover for it so Grace can't fall in, and that'll be done." He looked at the disorder and pushed back his hat to scratch his head. "Can't you get it all in?" "Yes, Charles," said Ma. "Where there's a will, there's a way." It was Laura who thought how to fit in the beds. The trouble was they now had 3 bedsteads. When they stood side by side, there was not enough room for Mary's rocking chair. Laura thought of setting the little bedsteads together tight in the corner and putting the foot of the big bedstead against them, with its headboard against the wall. "Then we'll hang a curtain around our beds," she said to Ma, "and another curtain across beside yours, and that leaves room for the rocking chair against your curtain." "That's my smart girl," said Ma. Against the foot of Laura's and Mary's bed, the table fitted under the window that Pa was sawing in that wall. Ma's rocking chair went in beside the table, and the whatnot fitted in that corner. Behind the door, in the 4th corner, stood the stove, with the dish cupboard made of a packing box behind it, and the trunk fitted between the stove and Mary's rocking chair. "There," said Ma. "All the boxes will go under the beds. It couldn't be better." At dinner, Pa said, "Before night, I'll finish this half of a house." And he did. He put a window in beside the stove to the south. He hung in the doorway a door bought from the lumberyard in town. Then all over the outside of the shanty, he put black tar paper, fastening it down with lath. Laura helped him unroll the wide, black, tarry-smelling paper down over the slanting roof and the walls of the fresh, clean, pine-scented boards. And she helped him cut it, and she held it down in the wind while he nailed on the lath. The tar paper was not pretty, but it stopped all the cracks and kept out the wind. "Well, that's one good day's work done," Pa said when they sat down to supper. "Yes," said Ma, "and tomorrow we'll finish unpacking and be finally settled. I must do a baking, too. It's a blessing to have yeast once more. I feel as though I never want to see another sourdough biscuit." Your light bread is good, and so are your sourdough biscuits," Pa told her. "But we won't have either if I don't rustle up something to bake them with. Tomorrow I'll haul a load of wood from Lake Henry." "May I go with you, Pa?" Laura asked. "Me too," Carrie begged. "No, girls," said Pa. "I'll be gone quite a while, and Ma will need you." "I wanted to see trees," Carrie explained. Oh, well. I wanted to see trees," Carrie explained. "I don't blame her," said Ma. "I would like to see some trees again myself. They would rest my eyes from all this prairie with not a tree, not even a bush to be seen in any direction." "This country's going to be covered with trees," said Pa. "Don't forget that Uncle Sam's tending to that. There's a tree claim on every section, and settlers have got to plant 10 acres of trees on every tree claim. In 4 or 5 years, you'll see trees everywhere you look." "I'll be looking in all directions at once then," Ma said. Ma smiled. "There's nothing more restful than the shady groves in the summertime, and they'll break the wind, too." "Well, I don't know," said Pa. "Trees spread, and you know what it was like back in the big woods of Wisconsin, grubbing out stumps and breaking our backs on the sprouting hoe to keep a little land clear for crops. It's restful to have clear prairie land like this, if you're going to farm. But Uncle Sam don't seem to look at it that way, so don't worry, Caroline. You're going to see plenty of trees all over this country. Likely they'll stop the wind and change the climate too, just as you say." They were all too tired for music that night. Soon after supper, they were all asleep. And bright and early next morning, Pa drove away toward Lake Henry. The whole world was gay in the early sunshine when Laura led Ellen to drink at the well. All over the prairie, the little white blossoms of wild onion were dancing in the wind. Down the slope of the little hill down below the shanty. Now, if there were wild onion, why weren't they harvesting them? Onions are like, I couldn't live without onions. And I used to hate them, but they're the main flavoring, for everything. Down the slope of the little hill below the shanty, patches of wild crocus spread yellow and blue in the young grass, and everywhere the sheep sorrel uncurled its pink lavender flowers above sleek clover-shaped leaves. It's called red clover. Sorrels actually got yellow flowers that I'm aware of. Laura bent down to pick them as she walked and slowly nibbled the delightfully fresh, sour little stems and petals. From the grass swell where she picketed Ellen, she could see the town beyond to the north. The big slough curved between and spread wide southwest, covering the acres upon acres with its rough high grass. All the rest of the whole enormous prairie was a green carpet flowered with spring blossoms. Big girl as she was, Laura spread her arms wide to the wind and ran against it. She flung herself on the flowery grass and rolled like a colt. She lay in the soft, sweet grasses and looked at the great blueness above her and the high, pearly clouds sailing in it. She was so happy that tears came to her eyes. Suddenly she thought, have I got a grass stain on my dress? She looked up and anxiously looked, and there was a green stain on the calico. Soberly, she knew that she should be helping Ma, and she hurried to the little dark tar paper shanty. It's tiger stripe, she said to Ma. What is, Laura? Ma asked, looking up startled. She was putting her books on the bottom shelves of the whatnot. The shanty, said Laura. It's striped with yellow lath on the tar paper. Tigers are yellow with black stripes, Mary objected. Nobody ever gives Mary shit for contradicting. You girls unpack your boxes now, said Ma. We'll arrange all our pretty things on these upper shelves. On the shelf above the books was room for Mary and Laura's and Carrie's little glass boxes. Each box had frosted flowers on its side and colored flowers on the lid. The three made that shelf all bright and gay. Ma stood the clock on the fourth shelf, its brown wooden case spread up in a carved lacy pattern from its round glass face, and behind the glass, painted with gilt flowers, with its brass pendulum wagged to and fro, tick-tock, tick-tock. On the smallest, very top shelf, above the clock, Laura set her china jewel box with its tiny gold cup and saucer on its top. And Carrie put beside it her brown and white china dog. It's very pretty, I'm sure, Ma approved. When the door is shut, the whatnot dresses up the room. Now for the china shepherdess. Then she looked around quickly and exclaimed, Mercy, is my bread sponge risen already? The bread sponge was lifting the lid off the pan. Ma hurriedly floured the bread and kneaded the dough. Then she got dinner. She was putting the pan of light biscuits in the oven when Pa came driving the wagon up the hill. Behind him, the wagon box was piled high with willow brush that he had brought for summer fuel, for there was no real trees at Lake Henry. Hello, Flutterbudget. Let dinner wait, Caroline, he called. I've got something to show you as soon as I picket the team. Quickly, he slipped the harness off the horses and dumped it across the wagon tongue. He hurried the horses away to their picket ropes and came hurrying back. Then he lifted a horse blanket from the wagon box. There you are, Caroline, he beamed. I covered them so they wouldn't dry out in the wind. What, Charles? Ma and Laura craned to see in the wagon box, and Carrie climbed up the wheel. Trees! Ma exclaimed. Little trees, Laura shouted. Mary, Pa brought little trees. They're cottonwood, said Pa. They all grew from the seeds of the lone tree that we saw across the prairie when we were coming out from Brookings. It's a giant of a tree when you get close to it. It's seeded all along the edge of Lake Henry. I dug enough of these seedlings to make a windbreak clear around the shanty. You're going to have your trees growing, Caroline, as quick as I can get them in the ground. He pulled his spade out of the wagon and said, the first one's your tree, Caroline. Pick it out and tell me where you want it. Just a minute, Ma answered. She hurried to the stove and shut its draft and set back the pot of potatoes. Then she picked out her tree. I want it right here by the door, she said. With his spade, Pa cut a square in the sod and lifted the grass. He dug a hole and loosened the soft soil until it was fine and crumbly. Then he carefully lifted the little tree and planted it without shaking the earth from its roots. Hold the top straight, Caroline, he said. Ma held the small tree straight by its top while with his spade, Pa... I'm sorry, guys, I'm stumbling tonight. Pa sifted the earth over its roots until the hole was filled. Then he stamped the earth down firmly and stood back. Now you can look at a tree, Caroline. Your own tree. We'll give each one of them a pail full of water after dinner, but first we get the roots in the ground. Come, Mary, it's your turn next. Pa dug another hole in a straight line with the first. He brought another tree from the wagon, and Mary carefully held it upright while Pa planted it. It was Mary's tree. Yours is next, Laura. He said, we'll make a square windbreak all around the house. Ma's tree and mine by the door, and a tree for each of you girls on each side of ours. Ma held her tree while Pa planted it. Then Carrie held hers. The 4 little trees stood upright from the patches of the dark earth and the grass. Now Grace must have hers, said Pa. Where's Grace? He called to Ma, Caroline, bring Grace out here to plant her tree. Ma looked out of the shanty. She's out there with you, Charles, she said. I guess she's behind the house. I'll get her, Carrie said, and she ran calling, Grace. In a minute, she came back from behind the shanty, her eyes large and scared, and the freckles standing out from her pale face. Pa, I can't find her. She must be close by, said Ma. She called, Grace, Grace. Pa shouted too, Grace. My dog's asleep on her blanket back there, and she moves every time I say her name. Don't stand there. Go look for her. Carrie, Laura, go, Ma said, and she exclaimed, the well, and ran down the path. The cover was on the well, so Grace had not fallen into it. Well, she can't be lost, Pa said. I left her outdoors. I thought she was with you, said Ma. She can't be lost, Pa insisted. She wasn't out of my sight a minute. He shouted, Grace, Grace. Sorry, Grace. Laura ran panting up the hill. She could not see Grace anywhere. Along the edge of the big slough toward the silver lake she looked, and over the flowery prairie. Quickly, she looked again and again, seeing nothing but wildflowers and grasses. Grace, Grace, she screamed, Grace. Pa met her on the slope as she ran down, and Ma came up gasping for breath. She must be in sight, Laura, Pa said. You must have missed seeing her. She can't be. Terribly, he exclaimed. The big slough. He turned and ran. Ma ran after him, calling back, Carrie, you stay with Mary. Laura, you go look for her. Look for her. Go look. Mary stood in the doorway of the shanty calling, Grace, Grace, Grace. More faintly from the big slough came Pa's shouts and Ma's, Grace, where are you, Grace? If Grace was lost in the big slough, how could anyone find her? The old dead grass stood higher than Laura's head, over acres and acres for miles and miles. The deep mud sucked at bare feet, and there were water holes. Laura could hear, where she stood, the sound of the coarse slough grass and the wind, muffling sound that almost smothered even Ma's shrill Grace. Laura felt cold and sick. Why don't you look for her? Carrie cried. Don't stand there. Do something. I'm going myself. Ma told you to stay with Mary, said Laura, so you better stay. She told you to look. Go look. Grace, Grace. Shut up. Let me think, Laura screeched, and she started running across the sunny prairie. Chapter 30. I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't like me interrupting myself while I'm reading, but 30, where the violets grow. Laura was running straight toward the south. Grass whipped soft against her bare feet. Butterflies fluttered over the flowers. There wasn't a bush or a weed that Grace could have hidden behind. There was nothing but grass and flowers swaying in the sunshine. If she were little and playing all by herself, Laura thought, she wouldn't go into the big dark slough. She wouldn't go into the mud and the tall grass. Oh, Grace, why didn't I watch you? She thought. How responsible Laura felt for everything, eh? Sweet, pretty little helpless sister. Grace, Grace, she screamed. Her breath caught and hurt in her side. She ran on and on. Grace must have gone this way. Maybe she had chased a butterfly. She didn't go into the big... She didn't go into the big slough. She didn't climb the hill. She wasn't there. Oh, baby sister, I couldn't see you anywhere, east or south on this hateful prairie. Grace! The horrible sunny prairie was so large, no lost baby could ever be found on it. Ma's calling and Pa's shouts came from the big slough. They were thin cries lost in the wind, lost on the enormous bigness of the prairie. Laura's breathing hurt her sides under her ribs. Her chest was smothering her, and her eyes were dizzy. She ran up the low slope. Nothing, not a spot of shadow was anywhere over the prairie all around her. She ran on, and suddenly the ground dropped before her. She almost fell down a steep bank. There was Grace. There, in a great pool of blue, sat Grace. The sun shone on her golden hair blowing in the wind. She looked up at Laura with big eyes as blue as violets. Her hands were full of violets. She held them up to Laura and said, "Sweet, sweet." Laura sank down and took Grace in her arms. She held Grace carefully and panted for breath. Grace leaned over her arm to reach more violets. They were surrounded by masses of violets blossoming over low-spreading leaves. Violets covered the flat bottom of a large round hollow. All around this lake of violets, grassy banks rose almost straight up to the prairie level. There, in the round, low place, the wind hardly disturbed the fragrance of the violets. The sun was warm there, the sky overhead. The green walls of grass curved all around, and butterflies fluttered over the crowding violet faces. Laura stood up and lifted Grace to her feet. She took the violets that Grace gave her and clasped her hand. "Come, Grace, we must go home." She gave one look around the little hollow while she helped Grace climb the bank. Grace walked so slowly that for a little while Laura carried her, and then she let her walk, for Grace was nearly 3 years old and heavy. Then she lifted her again, so carrying Grace and helping her walk, Laura brought her to the shanty and gave her to Mary. Then she ran across to the big slough, calling as she ran, "Pa, Ma, she's here!" She kept calling until they heard her until Pa heard her and shouted to Ma. Far in the tall grass, slowly together, they found their way out of the big slough and slowly came up to the shanty, draggled and muddy and very tired and thankful. "Where did you find her, Laura?" Ma asked, taking Grace in her arms and sinking into her chair. Laura hesitated and said to Pa, "Could it really be a fairy ring? It's perfectly round, and the bottom is perfectly flat. The bank around it is the same height all the way. You can't see a sign of that place until you stand on the bank. It's very large, and the whole bottom of it is solidly covered thick with violets. A place like that couldn't just happen, Pa. Something made it." "You are too old to be believing in fairies, Laura." "I still believe in fairies," Ma said gently. "Charles, you must not encourage such fancies." "But it isn't like a real place, truly," Laura protested. "And smell how sweet the violets are. They aren't like ordinary violets." "They do make the whole house sweet," Ma admitted. "But they're real violets, and there are no fairies." "You're right, Laura. Human hands didn't make that place," Pa said. "But your fairies were big, ugly brutes with horns on their heads and humps on their backs. That place is an old buffalo wallow. You know, buffaloes are wild cattle. They paw up the ground and wallow in the dust just as cattle do. For ages, the buffalo herds had these wallowing places. They pawed up the ground and the wind blew the dust away. Then another herd came along and pawed up more dust in the same way. They went always to the same places and..." "Why did they, Pa?" Laura asked. "I don't know," Pa said. Maybe because the ground was mellowed there. Now the buffalo are gone and the grass grows all over their wallows, grass and violets. Well, Ma said, all's well that ends well. And here it is long past dinner time. I hope you and Carrie didn't let the biscuits burn, Mary. Well, at least she... No, Ma, said Mary, and Carrie showed her the biscuits, wrapped in a clean cloth to keep warm, and the potatoes drained and mealy dry in their pot. And Laura said, sit still, Ma, and rest. I'll fry the salt pork and make the gravy. No one but Grace was hungry. They ate slowly, and then Pa finished planting the windbreak. Ma helped Grace hold her own little tree while Pa set it firmly. When all the trees were planted, Carrie and Laura gave them each a full pail of water from the well. Before they finished, it was time to get supper. Well, said Pa at the table, we're settled at last on our homestead claim. Yes, said Ma. All but one thing. Mercy, what a day this has been. I didn't get time to drive the nail for the bracket. I'll tend to it, Caroline, as soon as I drink my tea, Pa said. He took the hammer from its toolbox under the bed and drove a nail into the wall between the table and the whatnot. Now bring on your bracket and the China shepherdess, he said. Ma brought them to him. He hung the bracket on the nail and stood the China shepherdess on its shelf. Her little China shoes, her tight China bodice, and her golden hair were as bright as they had been long ago in the big woods of Wisconsin. Her China skirts were as wide and white, her cheeks as pink, and her blue eyes as sweet as ever. And the bracket that Pa had carved for Ma's Christmas present so long ago was still without a scratch, and even more glossily polished than it was when it was new. Over the door, Pa hung his rifle and his shotgun, and then he hung on a nail above them a bright new horseshoe. Well, he said, looking around at the snugly crowded shanty. A short horse is soon carried. In other words, a small house is soon cleaned. This is our tightest squeeze yet, Carolina. He called her Carolina. Or it was a misprint. But it's only a beginning. Ma's eyes smiled into his, and he said to Laura, I could sing you a song about that horseshoe. She brought him the fiddle box, and he sat down in the doorway and tuned the fiddle. Ma settled in her chair to rock Grace to sleep. Softly, Laura washed the dishes, and Carrie wiped them while Pa played the fiddle and sang. We journey along quite contented in life and try to live peaceful with all. We keep ourselves free from all trouble and strife, and we're glad when our friends on us call. Our home is happy and cheerful and bright. We're content and we ask nothing more. And the reason we prosper, I tell you now, there's a horseshoe hung over the door. Keep the horseshoe hung over the door. It will bring you good luck evermore. If you would be happy and free from all care, keep the horseshoe over the door. It sounds rather heathenish to me, Charles, Ma said. Well, anyway, Pa replied, I wouldn't wonder if we do pretty well here, Caroline. In time, we'll build more rooms onto this house and maybe have a driving team and buggy. I'm not going to plow up much grass. We'll have a garden and a little field, but mostly raise hay and cattle. Where so many buffalo ranged must be good country for cattle. The dishes were done. Laura carried the dishpan some distance from the back door and flung the water far over the grass where tomorrow's sun would dry it. The first stars were pricking through the pale sky. A few lights twinkled yellow in the little town, but the whole great plain of the earth was shadowy. There was hardly a wind, but the air moved and whispered to itself in the grasses. Laura almost knew what it said. Lonely and wild and eternal were land and water and sky and the air blowing. The buffalo are gone, thought Laura, and now we're homesteaders. 2 more chapters for tomorrow night. Now, about the horseshoe. Did you know that whenever you hang a horseshoe over your door, you always hang it up, like with the sides coming up. Unless you're a smithy or a farrier, someone who looks after horses and makes horseshoes and stuff. They are the only people allowed to hang their horseshoe over the door this way so that the luck runs out onto the anvil. This is Mrs. Wolfie from Reading with Beverly Wolfie. Hey, greetings from Saskatchewan. Yeah, Mary was a prissy little, and you know what bothered me the most when we read Little House on the Prairie, the book, was when they'd all got sick with yellow fever from the mosquitoes. They all got I guess it's yellow fever. Anyway, remember when they said, somebody had raised watermelons, and he went and brought a 40-pound watermelon back. He said, I'm as weak as water. But she wouldn't let the children have slices of watermelon because it grew in the night air. And everybody knew it came from the night air, which harbored mosquitoes, right? But, those watermelons, and she would not let her children eat the watermelons. And they had been through yellow fever and weak. And that fruit would have hydrated them so much and given them so much, so many vitamins. Anyway, I love you all. Take care. God bless. And see you tomorrow night. Mwah.